Today's June 29th, 2023, and I'm honored to have with me economist, futurist, and amazing thinker, George Gilder. I'm going to begin with a quick quote I read on the Amazon review of his book, Life After Capitalism. Gilder has been the most insightful synthesizer of technology and economics for over 4 decades. In this important book, his synthesis is complete. Wealth is knowledge, technology is the application of knowledge, and its advancement is a chief source of growth. Gilder destroys the materialist superstition by showing that knowledge/information comes from above and is imposed on matter. Wealth is not new matter, it is new knowledge. Gilder has been ahead of the learning curve on just about everything from the microcosm to the telecosm to the new system of the world based around blockchain technology. To that, I want to add that my admiration for Mr. Gilder extends to his, really acute social sensibilities. I think he wrote Sexual Suicide in the 1970s, and I don't know if we're going to have time to touch on that, but that's an amazing book. And right behind, you can see the Israel Test. Those are interesting topics for me. He's an incisive thinker, and without further ado, Mr. Gilder, so honored to have you. Can you tell us a little about yourself and how your thoughts have evolved and where they are right now, life after capitalism?
Well, I've been after writing Wealth and Poverty, which was made me President Reagan's most quoted living author, and during the course of researching Wealth and Poverty, I discovered the microchip and decided that the changes in technology would have as big or larger an impact on the future of economic growth and progress as the tax policies, the supply side tax policies that Reagan was launching. And I gave President Reagan his first microchip, 16K micron DRAM, and Reagan contemplated it, and we discussed its impact, the future impact of semiconductor technology on strategic defense, the SDI. And I told him that that microchips would give the defense a new advantage, and perhaps encouraged Reagan's confidence in his strategic defense initiative, which ultimately is alleged to have aided greatly the breakdown of the Soviet Union. So I turned to technology, and I wrote Microcosm and Telecosm and Life After Television, which predicted that the computer of the future would be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It would recognize speech. It would navigate streets. It would collect your news and your mail. But it just might not do Windows, I told the folks at Microsoft. And but this was in 1990 and pretty much captured what I call the age of the teleputer. But I haven't yet persuaded any company to define their product as a teleputer. But I think that's the best description of these cell phones, smartphones that we all carry about.
Yeah, no, I have mine right here. I call it a flashlight with brains.
Right. Well, that's kind of cumbersome compared to teleputer.
No, it's true. It's true. I'm just teasing about that because oftentimes I find, obviously it's awesome to have all the knowledge in the entire world, in your palm. But it's really cool at some points to have a flashlight, totally at hand as well.
Yeah. Well, there's a flashlight on your iPhone, of course.
No, it's amazing. So I believe you also had, you have a few life after books. Can you maybe go through those and how you evolved into the current title?
Well, life after television, I just described, predicting the teleputer or the smartphone and its ubiquity. And then life after Google was really a critique of the centralized data center model of computing. I believe that when I wrote Life After Google a couple of years ago, or in 2018, I think it came out, that the centralized data center model of cloud computing was going to give way to a new computer architecture in accordance with Bell's law. Gordon Bell was the founder of Digital Equipment Corporation, went on to Microsoft and predicted that the compounding effects of Moore's law, the doubling of microchip capabilities every couple of years, with Metcalfe's law, which was the exponential increase of networking capabilities, yield of networking capabilities, would result in a completely new computer architecture every 10 years. And I said that cloud computing and data center dominance had reached the end of the line in Life After Google. And it was judged the best foreign book published in China, the best foreign social science book published in China, and was a bestseller in China and pretty much a bestseller in the United States. And so Life After Capitalism explains our current circumstance where governments essentially have nationalized money, taken over their central banks, and use central banks as a way of stealing from the future, and in a hypertrophy of finance. And a key proposition of Life After Capitalism is that money is really time. That when you run out of money, you're really running out of the time to earn more money. And it details time prices, and time prices define the number of hours a typical worker has to labor.
I love that.
In order to earn the money to buy goods and services. And time prices have been detailed and explored first by William Nordhaus, the Yale Nobel laureate, who wrote a book about how ordinary prices completely misrepresent economic progress. And Gail Pooley and Marion Tupy, who are two economists, Tupy from St. Andrews in Scotland and Pooley from Brigham Young of Hawaii. Tupy's now at Cato and Pooley's at Discovery Institute. Anyway, they wrote a book called Superabundance, which is based on time prices, and shows that contrary to what you read everywhere, prices have been dropping massively for the last 100 years or more.
Yep.
And that economics is really a science of abundance, not of scarcity.
No, I love that.
What remains scarce when everything else grows abundant is time. And so I noted
I really love that
time.
coordination. I remember reading some time ago, as gasoline prices went up, and nobody likes when they go up, but the actual, number of miles you can go per amount of time you spend has gone down enormously, because people don't factor in. They think the price of the cars have gone up, the price of gasoline has gone up, and therefore they're poorer. But obviously, this isn't the case. I mean, gas mileage per, in a car has gone down quite a bit.
It's gone up.
Well, no, I mean the number of miles you can go. Yeah, fair enough. So however you want to put it exactly, where the numerator and denominator go.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
The number of miles you can go per gallon has gone up, and anyway, so when you actually do a throughput line, how much do I have to work to go a mile? That's gone down enormously.
Yeah,
and the efficiency.
And Tupy and Pooley have calculated those numbers for the 50 major commodities that support human life, and showed that while world population has gone up 70%, 75% actually, since 1980, the time a typical worker has to spend to earn the money to buy those 50 commodities has dropped 75%. So that it shows that as population grows, resources become more abundant, that human beings are not chiefly consumers of resources, we're creators of resources.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing thing. I saw somebody recently say, working on a computer is basically, having a piece of, having bits of rock powered by bits of lightning. We've harnessed, if you look at the microchip, I mean, a lot of it's, kind of comes from sand. So does glass. We create our commodities in a sense, and the idea that these are static is, I think, a misconception of right. Kind of, I think, frankly, most of our leaders and most of our pundits and purveyors of information in the press and so forth, it's always, desperate. The situation is desperate as usual. We're always at the end. We're going to run out of something. And I'm a big fan, I know you are, of the bet between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon. Maybe you can phrase that a little bit, how that went, and in the context of superabundance, where it would continue to go repeatedly.
Well, Julian Simon was a great economist from the University of Maryland, but wasn't well known. And in the late 1970s, when Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb and predicted that unless human population was reduced by some 50% over the next decades,
and not including himself, of course.
Well, I know I'm always bored with arguments to hypocrisy, but of course he didn't want to be among the victims of this vast global population crash that he predicted. But anyway, he believed that there would be vast famines all over the world during the 1980s, and half the world's population would ultimately die out. And he had these grandiose predictions of catastrophe that repeated the Malthusian mistake when Pastor Malthus said that world population was unsustainable back when it was about a 20th of what it is today, or maybe even smaller than that. But in any case, this Simon made a bet for $5,000 with Paul Ehrlich in the late 70s, I believe, and that any 5 resources that Ehrlich wanted to name, you choose them, would become more abundant, measured by a lower real price during the subsequent 10 years. And I think it was from 80 to 90. I'm not sure just what the dates were, but it was a 10-year period in the late 20th century. And And amazingly, Ehrlich took the bet, and it was everything was on Ehrlich's side, because obviously if the 5 resources that he thought were most scarce and most likely to spike in price, there is no limit to how much money Simon could lose, and while the prices could only go to 0. So the worst that could happen to Ehrlich was that he would lose his $5,000.
Right, because they're basically they were buying a basket of these commodities. So I think he could put, of the $5,000, he could put as much as he wanted in each of those commodities. And I think, I forget what they were. There was like titanium and wheat, and any number of things, from food to hard items. Oil.
Yeah, he actually it happened that Ehrlich chose 5 rare metals. I don't, as I recall. Mm-hmm. I don't think he included wheat, but he could have included anything. And he lost. And
not only did he lose in the aggregate, but he lost in each separate silo of his bet. Yeah. Every single category became, easier to get over time. Yeah. At the time at which population had grown again another, 10% or something like that in the interim worldwide. So it was a real, I guess it was an incredible enlightening moment. I'm not an economist. I'm a medical doctor. But, a lot of these things were huge awakenings as my kind of political thought came to be. And, if you look up the bet, there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a reformulations. People are trying to show that Ehrlich really won. I mean, it's just nobody can acknowledge defeat. So there are all these reformulations of this and that, all these caveats and whatnot. As Julian Simon somehow eked by, and he got Ehrlich was chose poorly. But what you're saying here is that via superabundance kind of concepts, that it's always going to be the case. And the one example I bring up and comes to mind is I read newspaper heading, I think late 1890s or whatever, that there would soon be no lights on the streets because whales would go out of existence. And not only have whales not gone out of existence, but the whole modality changes. And I think this is the real central to your thesis, as well as Professor Simon's, that we go elsewhere. When we hit against a wall. I don't know if you've seen those little Roomba robots. They clean your room. They don't just sit against the wall trying. They try some other route. I mean, they're now they're smarter and smarter robots, but they have an algorithm. And so the algorithm is not just to go press on blindly against a wall. You wind up going in other directions. And perhaps you can speak about that. And what is the actual essence of economy?
Well, the life after capitalism applies the information theory, which animates our information industries, computers and communications, robotics and biotech, which are all information industries. And it takes that theory and applies it and extends it to economics. And the 4 key propositions of the information theory of economics, as expounded in Life After Capitalism, are: wealth is knowledge. And we know wealth is knowledge because, as Thomas Sowell said in a book in 1971, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the physical material resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age, we can say, is entirely attributable to the expansion of knowledge. So if wealth is essentially knowledge, what is economic growth? Economic growth is learning. And I've been a student of learning curves ever since after I wrote Wealth and Poverty. Bill Bain of Bain and Company, a great business consultancy in Boston, called me up and said that that it wasn't just incentives that resulted in lower tax rates yielding higher revenues than higher tax rates. The Laffer curve, in essence, Art Laffer's curve that showed cutting tax rates expanded the revenues for the government, even while the economy grew faster. And that was that it was learning, that the learning curve had been documented by the Boston Consulting Group and Bain and Company for all products across the whole economy. With every doubling of total units sold, you got a 20 to 30% drop in unit costs. It didn't matter whether it was microchip transistors, lines of computer code, trucking miles, barrels of oil, sheaves of wheat, whatever it was. A doubling of total units produced or sold resulted in a 20 to 30% drop. And this is learning. It's as you do something more and more, you get better and better at doing it. You find shortcuts and new efficiencies and new ways. And on top of the learning curve in each product, you get new learning curves generated all the time with new products. And so the economy grows through a massive learning. And learning is really the acquisition of new information. And information in information theory is defined as unexpected bits, as surprise. Essentially, information is what you don't know. Everything I tell you today, you already know. No information has been transmitted. And this was Claude Shannon's great insight that allowed the development of all our information sciences. Claude Shannon developed the bit and the byte, showed the superiority of digital computation to analog computation that was previously regarded to be more efficient. And he applied his master's degree from MIT was in genetics. He was calculating the information content of the DNA code and Mendelian genetics. And that was his, and during the war, he wrote a great paper on cryptography that got classified. And one of my theses in Life After Capitalism is that it was the suppression of this classified paper made the internet insecure. And that's why the internet is good for any kind of communication. It's a giant copying machine, but it's not good for transactions or contracts or actionable propositions. And so the blockchain is an important invention that enables a new kind of global money, which I think will be based on time and time prices. And so this is really the four propositions are wealth is knowledge, growth is learning, money is time, information is surprise. And that's the essence of the information theory of economics. But it has lots of effects that undermine the devout beliefs of most economists.
No, and they are they are devout. It's an interesting thing because there's an old joke. How can you tell? What do they call the extra decimal points in economics? That shows that economists have a sense of humor. There's so much certainty amidst so much incorrect theorizing, and it has aspects of a religion in a sense. Certainly, the application I think we see this over and over again as kind of a I'm not sure it's really Luddite, but we'll call it Thunbergian, the Greta Thunberg calls. And we always see this, as if the resources are finite. Humans are unable or unwilling to change. And even if you stipulate, that the water levels were to change, the concept that humans would do nothing is really inimical with what humans have always been able to do, which is figure things out. I mean, it goes against logic that the largest agrarian agricultural producer, the most efficient on earth, is the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, as far as Netherlands literally means lowlands, and a lot of those lowlands were so low they weren't even land. And so you have, in a sense, the Netherlands are the food source for a good fraction of the other parts of the world, despite having a tiny country, very little natural land, and so forth. And of course, what's being attacked these days is farming in the Netherlands. We see oftentimes a government
nitrogen. They think nitrogen is a poison. And
it's an incredible thing. First of all, I hate the misnomer when they call something like nitrogen, or when there's different forms of nitrogen. I was a chemistry major, so these things kind of bristle. Like which things? Like nitrogen is obviously the largest component of the. We're going through electromagnetic waves, but if we were in the same room, the largest thing separating us would be 70% of air comprised of nitrogen, which itself is N2. It's bonded nitrogen to itself. It's obviously harmless. We never think of it because it's entirely inert. And there's all these, kind of nitrous and nitric aspects, as part of the soil, and whatnot. But
which makes the soil fertile.
When people talk about carbon, whether they mean carbon dioxide, and I always challenge people. What percentage of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide? Everyone says, 15%, 20%. Something like that is getting higher. They have no concept of the actual minimum amounts that are carbon dioxide.
0.004%.
Very good. You are on target. So I want to bring up a slide which I liked, and I forget the two authors' name. I think one is Pooley, but I think this is her quote from your book. I'm just going to put it up for a second.
This is Gail Pooley.
Thank you so much. So pop quiz. How many keys are in a piano? 88. So how many songs in a piano? If you answered infinity, anyway, there are actually 0 songs in a piano, unless they've been programmed into it. Songs exist in the minds of human beings. With a fixed number of keys, we can create an infinite number of songs. Keys are hardware, songs are software, keys are atoms, songs are knowledge. And that's preface to her chapter within your book. But I think it perhaps brings up some aspects.
It's not her. Gail is a guy.
Oh,
Gail Pooley is a guy.
Of course. There you go with making presumptions. Anyway, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how that figures into your book, literally and figuratively.
Well, it's a good summary of overcoming the materialist superstition, the belief that we live on a limited planet with scarce resources, and ultimately it's a zero-sum game, that if one person amasses a lot of the resources, it means somebody else forgoes those resources. it ultimately is summed up in the Ehrlich view that humans are a plague on the planet, and that ultimately we got to reduce our carbon footprints and abolish our industrial civilization and retreat to bicycles and caves. And it's all based on the materialist superstition that wealth consists of scarce material resources rather than bountiful, in fact, infinite possibilities of new ideas and inventions. I like to quote Albert Hirschman, the Princeton economist who studied all the various UN planned economic projects all around the world and found none of them worked. None of them followed their plan at all. None of them kept in their budget or anything. However, quite often there would be some surprising entrepreneurial achievement associated with this activity. And that was all the successes of the UN came from surprising creativity. And Hirschman said, creativity always comes as a surprise to us. It's new information. And if creativity didn't come as a surprise, we wouldn't need it. And government planning would work. But and this is why, a key principle of information theory, as defined by Shannon, he defines the amount of information in part by the degrees of freedom at the source of the information. The producer of the information, his degrees of freedom determine the potential information that can be conveyed. In other words, it's ultimately a libertarian insight. Mm-hmm. And if we try to guarantee a prosperous world, we will sink ourselves into irretrievable poverty.
Yeah. So I had the economist Paul Freiters, Frijters, originally Dutch. He lives in Australia sometimes, and sometimes elsewhere in Dubai and so forth, I believe, or Middle East. Anyway, he's against this agglomeration, kind of like the lockstep aspects of world governors hoping for some type of world governance. And, the underpinnings, say, of the WEF, Klaus Schwab kind of coterie, to have everyone work in uniformity, and we're all going to reduce whatever. You'll eat bugs and be happy. You'll have nothing and be happy, all this kind of stuff. And he points out that it's similar to what you're saying, that when you have uniformity of governance, you're going to have uniformity of idea. I don't even say use the plural, ideas. You're going to have a uniformity of idea, and it's going to be applied top down, and it's going to avoid the trickle up bursts of creativity. And having governance and having a panoply of popular opinion and so forth is how things happen. Things strike up against each other in odd ways, and you have things occur that we wouldn't have expected. But the more you have uniformity in governance, the less likely you're going to have creativity, and the less likely you're going to be able to dig your way out of the holes, which inevitably centralized power bring, because those centrally in power oftentimes accrue a lot of the wealth and hoard a lot of the resources for themselves, as we've seen, fascistically, I would say.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it accords with the idea that the increase of freedom fosters more creativity and thus more wealth, and creativity comes as a surprise.
Right. Well,
And
I'd like to.
so if you guarantee, you thwart surprise. I did a book a few years ago called Knowledge and Power, that expounded information theory of economics in a more technical, detailed way. And it showed that it's knowledge is produced by individual human minds, and in order to have it prosper, you got to distribute power as widely as knowledge is distributed. And what we're doing today is concentrating power and thus stultifying our economies.
Yeah, I can see that. I'd like just as a little bit of a helper for viewers to see. These are some of you have the kind of your mosaic code. You have your 12 laws of the infocosm. I don't know if you'd like to touch on any of these, at least briefly, and I can flip through the slides as you might like.
Well, I'm in general, economics has been known as a science of scarcity ever since it was formed, that somehow it's optimizing the use of scarce resources. And my thesis is the only real scarce resource is time, that all other resources derive from the infinite number of atoms in the universe that can be combined in infinite ways, and that economics is a science of abundance, but we do live in the darkness of time. And the way we incorporate this real scarcity of time that we all face from day to day is through tokenized time, which is money. And money is the way the scarcity of time is transmitted through all the transactions in an economy. And that is and today what's happening is money is being treated as if it's abundant, and this is and issued by central banks and in alliance with politicians, and the result is to steal from the future. The politicians are flooding the world with trillions of dollars of subsidies to combat a delusional idea of climate change, as if the climate doesn't always change and we don't always change with it. I mean, it's the human condition throughout the millennia but it's now seriously been argued that we need global government controlling the use of all our resources in order to overcome some spurious idea that carbon is a poison, and it's to the planet rather than the source of life. And
I know we went from being carbon-based life forms to being terrified of carbon.
Yeah.
And it again also brings up the similar question to the Ehrlich hypothesis, is like, oh, well, you can do your part by stop breathing, but nobody seems to entertain that possibility for themselves. It's always a them versus us. There's a huge disdain, it seems, from on above amongst our elites for the actual people. I think there's I think your theories, they have a kind of spiritual aspect as well. I don't know if you want to delve into that at all, but I think the way in which people are treated from their elites is horrible.
Yeah. Well, we're creative in the image of our creator, is the way I put it, and we have to understand that that there are no guarantees. Creativity is surprising and usually more bountiful than we can anticipate, and that actually the human condition has been improving drastically ever since the Industrial Revolution, and there's most of the propositions about the distribution of wealth or the immiseration of the middle class or the expansion of poverty. All these propositions are completely false, and as demonstrated in my book, Life After Capitalism, in great detail and authority and superabundance. This book by Marion Tupy and Gail Pooley, that Larry Summers, who is Obama's chief economic advisor for a while, devoted 20 minutes to celebrating the work in Life After and Superabundance when it was launched in Washington about a year ago now, maybe less.
Well, it's good for him. You know, he's had some high moments and low moments. You know, I kind of never. I mean, it's not up to me to forgive him, but you know, I never forgive him for backing down statement that men and women kind of approach their interest in science differently. You know, you said it, you thought it, you've got your own PhD or whatever he has. You know, stick with your guns. I mean,
I know.
I just think that the culture of blind apology is not helpful.
You're absolutely right.
And I'm not sorry for saying that. So I'm just joking. But
you're a doctor. You just watch the lockdowns and the mask mandates.
No, absolutely.
It's closed schools.
No, it's a crazy thing. You know, it's just so hilarious. You know, people watch some movie like Austin Powers. I don't know if you're familiar, and you know, it's famous for Dr. Evil. And whatever the movie it happens to be, whether it's Dr. No and James Bond or Dr. Evil today, who's more satirical version of Dr. No. You know, so whatever genre whether you Marvel comics or what, there's always the evil super genius. And what does he want to do? He wants to take over the world. And yet, when people have their favorite kind of almost cliche theories, well, what's the ultimate goal? To take over the world. But they don't see it as Dr. Evil. They see themselves as Dr. Good, or Dr. Feelgood, or Mr. whatever. And they don't never see themselves, just like Paul Ehrlich can't see himself, and Al Gore can't see himself, and Greta Thunberg can't see herself as, you know, conducive to whatever, you know, ill they think they're bringing on by living and breathing, and they should be accepted. And John Kerry should ride a jet because his work is more important than yours, while you should sit at home. So it's just a funny thing that through the ages they don't have any real perspective, or they're just getting paid so enormously to think differently. I mean, the inconvenient truth about the inconvenient truth is that he made a fortune on it, and it's an amazing topic that you know doesn't really, you know, lend itself to verification.
Well, they mobilized trillions of dollars of subsidies around the world to fund this cause, and corrupted markets everywhere in behalf of this inconvenient falsehood that Gore propounded.
Yeah.
And they can't change their minds either. One of the businesses go bankrupt. Politicians get richer with their mendacity.
Yeah. No, it's funny thing. I mean, the real evils in the world, if we want to call it that, you know, I mean, I think the real goods and the real evils in the world are not amongst the rocks and sand and grain and whatnot. It's really within the human heart, and it's really a matter of whether we can manage ourselves appropriately. You know, I think the real and most of the real evils are propounded, to use your word, under the concept that they are good. I don't think the Soviets And I don't think Mao or Stalin saw themselves necessarily as evil dictators. I think they saw themselves as having everyone, lockstep to this new utopia. And probably, and Hitler had his own visions of perfection as well. They just, I think part of the problem is they get bottled up and they become like a bottle rocket towards a certain direction, which is not really the way, humans operate. And so people are always trying to extracurricularly and extra humanly, make a preordained future. And with the concept of ordination, putting their own order and having their religious order apply to it. Although they don't necessarily follow the standard religions, they wouldn't consider themselves religious. There's just kind of, I think most of these things fall into the aspect of religion, wherein we're supposed to pay indulgences and so forth to the carbon gods so forth, instead of and look down upon the Aztecs who sacrificed virgins on the altar. And I do look down upon that, but I also look down upon both.
I always call the windmills as totem poles and the solar panels as sun hinges for a new religion of climate change.
Yeah, and I'm not against those things per se. I just think they should.
Cancel culture is just a Moloch, like those sacrificial altars the Aztecs employed.
So a lot of times it comes down to better and more helpful religions. And so I think a lot of it, I'm kind of more of a science guy, but a lot of it, a lot of science has come down to the battle of religions. I brought this point up numerous times, but throughout the lockdown, I have, you may not believe this, but I have friends, and one of my friends, maybe not any longer, he's a physician, and he got COVID early on. So did his wife, and he's healthy, not overweight, no medications, in his 50s, and he was fine. He sees kids, and I said, "Oh, this is it's early 2020," and I said, "Okay, great. Well, it's time. You can take your mask off for the kids and so forth." He says, "No, I can't." I said, "Well, do you think you're ever going to get COVID again?" He said, "No." "Do you think you can give it to anybody else now that you're recovered?" "No." "Are you fully immune?" "Yes." "Is wearing a mask going to help you in any way?" "No." "So why are you still wearing one?" He says, "Not the right time yet." Anyway, just to cut to the chase, his answer was that basically when Nancy Pelosi says this is the right time, there was a lot politically yet left to gain against the evil Mr. Trump. And so the mask would stay on for the duration. And mind you, they were correct. They, in their formulation, their battle plan, Machiavellian as it were, to use the virus for other means and to making mail-in ballots, which I think predetermined the result. But whether it's science or not is another thing. I think that definitely has the science verging into the religion and the politics and so forth. And I think insofar as there's a religion imbued in your work, I think it's a much more helpful, hopeful one, insofar as the real. And I think, mind you, it is scientifically verified, like as per Mr. Soule's observation, that that all the same tools were at the Neanderthals' hands or our cavemen and so forth, and yet we have the knowledge with which to do things. Anyway, so that was a little diatribe. I maybe wondering, if you can talk about how tongue-in-cheek the term "life after capitalism" is, as title of your book, because I think there's capitalism after capitalism, isn't there not?
Yeah. Well, capitalism was named by Karl Marx, and
it's an insult. It's like the Ivy League. It's a pejorative.
Yeah, it was named, and I think it is based on the materialist superstition as accepted by Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations. Wealth of Nations express physics envy. Adam Smith wanted to reproduce in economics or in social theory, the great breakthrough of Isaac Newton in physics 100 years earlier. And he accepted the materialist superstition, and that economics was a science of scarcity, that it was that an economy was a great machine, that human beings responded to incentives, that it was chiefly engineered incentives that made the economy prosper. And I don't believe, I think incentives are ubiquitous, and greed, as by an invisible hand, leads to an ever expanding welfare state, because a really greedy person wants to get rewards without devoting his time to achieving benefits for other people. And that's the rule of capitalism. Real capitalism is that you gotta, you are rewarded in proportion as you do good for others, and collaborate with others, and respond to the needs of others. It's that's the ultimate essence of capitalist systems. And so, and information theory, which does really offer a better way to understand capitalism, because it's based on surprisal and creativity.
No,
it understand it's
no, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a beautiful thing that you've come up with, and I'm really, very much emotionally in your debt. I just want to, for our audience, maybe just go over some of the, just so they can pause this and look it over later. Some of your do's and don'ts for a thriving economy and information age. I like do allow bankruptcies. We have done the opposite in some of our recent economic scares, most recently with Silicon Valley Bank et al. And prior in the 2008 meltdown, or whatever you want to call it. Don't give guarantees. Entropy and surprise are what define information, knowledge, etc. And I love these here. Don't find uncertainty. If you let it happen, it will be better than you can imagine. And do remember you are not in control. I think the centralization of power tends to be for the purpose of the centralization of power. Rather than for those presumably over whom they rule. So we're rounding out the hour. I'd like to, leave you with some the opportunity for some closing thoughts, and then maybe we'll promote your book at the end.
Well, this is around my 22nd book, and it sums up many of the themes of previous ones, and it really integrates the previous books to a great extent. For example, Silicon Valley, its preoccupation with artificial intelligence. Elon Musk, and who was a great entrepreneur, and hundreds of other leading figures in Silicon Valley believed that AI can usurp the human mind and relegate human beings to the periphery, and maybe even destroy the human race as an inferior force. And I think this is another evidence of the materialist superstition, the idea that somehow human minds are just the product of random evolution and natural selection over, and that obviously a brilliant computer scientist in Silicon Valley can produce a better brain than mere material evolution. And so this materialist superstition has pervasive effects, and I believe AI is the next phase of computer science. It's very useful in many applications, but it is totally unrelated to a human mind, and is completely dependent on human minds, and is essentially retrospective. It shuffles labels of previous knowledge. And Charles Peirce, the great mathematical philosopher from Harvard back in the early 20th century, said that reality is triadic, that there is no necessary connection between symbol systems and real objects, that connection is necessarily made by a third party who is the interpretant. And it's when you imagine that a binary digital system of on-off switches can be a mind, it just means that the interpretant is some programmer somewhere, or the biases in the system that collected the data, or the biases in the algorithm. It doesn't mean there's no interpretant.
Right.
And it just means there's no rational human mind governing the system.
Yeah, actually,
one human mind has a connectome as big as the entire global internet, believe it or not. The connections in a single human mind that runs on 12 to 14 watts of power has a connectome, as Patrick Song of MIT has calculated, as big as the total global internet. Both of them take a couple petabytes to map. But the global internet takes gigawatts of power to sustain, and the single human mind takes
all right. Well, that's a wonderful example. I just want to close with a couple things. First of all, this is from your book, Sexual Suicide, which I think got renamed. But I'm just going to put this up. People could pause on this. This is from the 1970s, and I'm putting it up just to kind of show your bona fides as a futurist. I think they're fairly apt, but we're not going to have time to do that. So I want to just.
Well, there's going to be a new edition of Men and Marriage.
Men and Marriage
coming out in August. A new after 50 years in print, Men and Marriage is being republished.
Well, if you'd come back on my show, I'd love to talk about that one.
All right.
And then I just want to let people see your book here. So here is one place you can get it, Life After Capitalism. I have been reading it. It's a great book. It's eye-opening. And I wish we could have spent some time talking about Kurt Gödel and Königsberg and Euler and uncertainty and so forth. You're a great thinker, and I'm totally in your debt. I often end as well with my own book I'm promoting here to help support this podcast. People, they don't have to read it, but they should buy it.
Oh, I want to read this. I agreed with this.
It's an amazing topic. It's overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. We don't hear anything about it since then. It's got a picture of me on the cover here, but any rate, so people can look into that. Buy the work of George Gilder. It's fascinating. I guarantee you, you're going to love it. It's certainly going to bring a smile to your day, as you personally did to mine. So thank you so much. We're going to say goodbye to everybody. You and I can chat for a second, but we're going to say goodbye to the outside world. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.